afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Vijay Sadana, Chairman, Task Force on Direct Selling, ASSOCHAM. Dr. Nandimath, Registrar and Law Professor, National University Law School, Bangalore. Distinguished guests. You are going to, throughout the course of today, hear a large number of statistics, I'm sure, not just now, but in the various panels which will take place. And these statistics are really impressive statistics. If you think about it, the World Federation of Direct Selling Association gives you numbers like $189.6 billion in terms of sales revenue which has been generated by the Direct Selling Association. And those are not numbers to be sniffed at by any means. The real relevance of data and numbers, however, is in its application to India itself. And that's where there is a little bit of consideration to be given, because in India you have 5.1 million people who are involved in the direct selling business and a revenue of $1.513 billion in 2017. Now, I'm going to give you a comparative evaluation because in China you have 5.3 million distributors who are involved in direct selling, and their sales revenue for 2017 totaled 34.29 billion. That is a huge disparity between two countries with equally, if not very similar demographics across the board. The key question, therefore, becomes why? Why is there, when you have the exact nature of knowledge, intellect, and ability in a country, does there exist a disparity of this nature? And I think, based on industry experts, the answer is simply this, that there is a lack of regulatory direction and regulations, and there are just too many uncertainties associated to it. My learned friend, Dr. Nandimath, mentioned, and he spoke on concessions for benefits, and I think that's a great start if we are able to do that, because perhaps part of the reason could be inculcating a greater understanding in everybody as to what the direct benefits are of direct selling. Aside from just direct benefit, there is so much indirect benefit as well, which is associated to it. So I guess we then come back to this issue of the guidelines, and as we speak today, there is a developing market potential in countries like Africa and the Middle East where there are no regulations which exist. So the key question is this: can India's guidelines, because if you look at your Indian guidelines, they are excellent guidelines. They have literally trawled perhaps some of the legislation of the world to encapsulate themselves into these guidelines, which can respectively be a model for the rest of the world, and especially for developing countries which do not have any guidelines. One point that comes to mind is, again, it's a point which was raised, that it's been 2 years since these guidelines have come about. And in 2 years, only 6 states have adopted this guideline. Where is the uniformity which we are able to provide if there could be a uniform acceptance of these guidelines? Because a uniform acceptance could lead to codification, could lead to a proper law, could lead to greater regulation, and in turn remove any element of uncertainty which exists. So that is something which could be a trendsetter in terms by itself. Turning to the insight on international perspectives, Europe and USA are very mature markets. We then have the Middle East, we then have the Asia-Pacific region. And if you look at the Asia-Pacific region, which comprises firstly of mature markets like Japan, Australia, and Korea, all these countries have specific regulatory mechanisms. In fact, Korea has a FTC, or the equivalent of a Fair Trade Commission, along the same lines as modeled with the US. Other countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, most of these countries have put into place a robust regulatory framework for the direct selling industry with the support of local associations which handle issues which arise in respect of direct selling. However, some countries have been very specific. What they've done is that they've enacted specific direct selling legislation to discourage bad practices within the industry itself. These countries would be like Malaysia, which has a Direct Selling Act and regulations enacted as far back as 1993, and it is regulated via the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Industry in Malaysia. Vietnam in 2005, so 13 years ago, saw the benefits of the direct selling industry, and via a decree 110, regulated by the Ministry of Industry and Trade, put into place a certain set of codes and ethics for the industry. Indonesia has an authority known as the BKPM, which regulates the trade business activities, and it is also supported by a local association which undertakes due diligence process on companies which are involved in direct selling. A license is then issued under SIUPL. Singapore has no licensing regime as such, but what it does have is it has the Multi-Level Marketing and Pyramid Selling Act. It then has an exclusion order to that act, under which 7 criteria are stipulated, and if you comply with those 7 criteria, you are seen to be a proper direct selling company. It also has a lemon law, it has a Fair Trading Act, and all these activities are then regulated via these provisions. Hong Kong has centered on customer privacy, data protection, and consumer protection. At present, direct selling in Hong Kong has become multi-channel and electronic to a large extent. China, quite interesting, because in 2005, China enacted 2 laws specifically to deal with direct selling, and these would be the Regulation on Direct Selling Administration and the Regulation on Prohibition of Chuan Xiao. This was revised in 2016 with allowances being made for specific free trade zones being set up, and the regulation over the nature and types of products which can be sold in the direct selling space. So the regulatory framework in Asia is very much on specific acts, and of course, as I've said, in some countries specifically targeted against any form of unsustainable pyramid selling. The main features which all these acts and enactments take into place is that there should be no recruitment commission, maintenance of audit of records, no fraudulent activities on sales, refund buyback guarantees, written contracts and confirmations of guarantees, no entry fees, specific licenses for direct sellers, and giving direct sellers an identity as a professional. Asian countries, therefore, seem to have shown that to leverage the benefits of the direct selling industry, some form of proper regulatory support and enactment is helpful and beneficial. Next, we turn to Europe. Compliance in the European Union is extremely strict for marketing and sales to the public at large. In fact, the top 6 markets in Europe within the direct selling industry are Germany, France, UK, Italy, Poland, and Russia. And the European Union has a directive on unfair commercial practices in 2005, which bans pyramid schemes. In 2011, the EU overhauled its consumer protection legislation and merged several existing rules into a single rule book, which is called the Consumer Rights Directive. And this directive contains provisions on core information to be provided by companies prior to the conclusion of any consumer contracts. In 2013, the EU also adopted rules on alternative dispute resolution. And what that did was it gave consumers the right to turn to alternative dispute resolution instead of taking matters into their own hands and referring complaints or having expensive litigation. This also reduced the grievance and redressal mechanism and made very much an ease of reference to one centralized body. You then go on to understand that companies in Europe need to provide full and frank disclosure of any consumer contracts and information. So what that does is that it leads to informed consent and informed knowledge in terms of a purchase being made. All of this has then been encapsulated again into another directive, because the protection of personal data and the use of such data, especially within the direct selling industry, is regulated now by the GDPR. So there are strict laws which are applicable in all these places. Turning to the USA, I guess the USA has long been the benchmark and standard of what is the kind of regulation which is required. And direct selling in the United States is regulated by Section 5 of the FTC Act, which sets out what are anti-pyramid standards which are used by all direct selling companies, both within, I guess, the United States, as much as perhaps followed by companies which are outside of the United States as well. And apart from the FTC regulation, 6 states in the United States has enacted anti-pyramid laws. The anti-pyramid laws which are enacted by these states are similar to those issued by the European Union, and they mandate buyback of inventory and additional consumer protection. The 6 states are Georgia, Idaho, South Dakota, Utah, Washington, and Louisiana. Member states also have guidelines to protect consumers and regulate door-to-door selling and direct selling. So, according to FICCI and KPMG in 2016, direct selling can reach 64,500 crores with a 7% year-on-year annualized increase. Now, I can't even begin to do the math, but that sounds to me to be an incredible number. And how do you achieve such exponential growth? And I think the answer must only be in removing uncertainty and regulating for the business. I think it is only in this way that we are going to truly find a balance within which our industry can exist. My learned friend spoke of employment and human capital. And whilst we speak of machination and artificial intelligence replacing the human problem, as he put it, there is a lot of truth to it. But his ideas and innovative steps in creating employment is such a plus factor. If we could couple this and put it in a format which is not just easy to use, but also which provides clearly for people to operate within, I think you remove a lot of the problem, and you can only create a better business future for the direct selling industry tomorrow. Thank you all for your time.